I actually just recently watched Joy Luck Club. It shows a lot of real emotions.
We were comparing it to Crazy Rich Asians,
Yeah.
and the people in Toilet Club are just, they're not so plastic, they're not such cardboard
Mhm.
cutouts, they're about real relationships and individuals.
It showed the perspective from each of the daughters and each of the mothers. I could relate to a lot of it, especially the daughters who grew up in the States. It doesn't matter which generation it is, there's still a certain similarity there.
Yeah, the cultural conflict and the
Yeah.
input of two different cultures, and sometimes they are at odds with each other.
Do you feel like sometimes maybe we don't understand what our parents went through? They used to always tell me, as kids, we haven't really experienced anything bitter in our lives or like
Mm-hmm.
we haven't suffered at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and
It's
I
true.
never really understood like what they meant.
Yeah.
But after like watching the film, it's like I can't imagine what the previous generations have been through,
Yeah.
especially in those times.
My parents, they had to move constantly to avoid combat and bombing and those kinds of things. And then to come to a really different culture and try to make a new life, it's very, very brave. And then when they were here, they had a period of time when they could not go back to China and they had to make a choice. Those are difficult choices because the cultures are so different.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty interesting that they chose a different kind of life.
Yeah.
Definitely easier economically. Lots of promise.
You said that they were escaping China because of World War II. They like traveled by boat here from the
Yeah,
movie. They're also traveling by the boat. At the
yeah.
time, I couldn't really imagine what that looked like.
They wanted us to fit in, which is something that made them actually not speak enough Chinese to us. I think it's really different from the Chinese that are have come to the US more recently. I think like Tiger Moms and a lot of the more recent immigrants, I think, are more concerned with keeping Chinese uh, cultural traditions alive in their families. And the new Crazy Rich Asians, I think, I don't know, I don't even have enough experience with that
Mm.
generation. But I know that my parents really wanted us to fit in, so they made extra efforts to understand Western ways themselves.
For you guys to get good grades. And
Oh yeah, no, that was super important. And they all, we should be doctors, all of our parents. But my parents were the most thoughtful and liberal, like you do what you want to do. I was born in West Lafayette in St. Elizabeth Hospital. So my parents named me Elizabeth because it was an accessible American name. And my my dad was raised Catholic in China, which was kind of unusual, but my parents, my mom agreed to raise us kids Catholic. So my dad was teaching at Purdue in aeronautical engineering, and there were very few other Chinese kids in our schools. We had one sort of best friend who was a little bit younger than us, who was in our grade school. Maybe a handful of other Chinese kids that we knew. We were raised mostly around Americans. My dad had some Chinese students,
Mhm.
so he would invite some of them over for a Chinese student club, but we couldn't relate to the Chinese born Chinese. You pick up so much from the culture that you're growing up in. I had a fair amount of conflict, so I always felt a little bit misplaced, like I didn't know which kind of person I wanted to be like. And the most comfortable that I ever felt was when we, in high school, our parents created this organization called Meizhongjiaying, American Chinese Association, and they sponsored the Chinese family camp. We hung out with all these ABCs, as we call them, American born Chinese, and those were kids that you just had this wonderful common ground of understanding, and those kids became our best friends. I just made a piece yesterday with a little figure, and it says ABC. It says "war" underneath it. I thought about using FOB, but that's fresh off the boat. But that's already been used in that TV series.
What was your experience like moving to Montana?
Well, when I was growing up, my dad got jobs in California for the summer. And so for about 4 or 5 years in a row, we drove across the West. Several things about California, Chinatown, and there's amazing Chinese food and lots more Asians around. So that was always a wonderful place to go every summer. But the trips across, my parents were both very adventurous and liked to see the national parks and things. So I fell in love with the mountains. And so when I was looking for graduate schools, I looked at places where there was some scenic beauty. I applied to a few different places, but I ended up choosing Montana partly just because it reminded me of our trips west. But when I got to Montana, then there were really no Chinese people. If I thought there were no Chinese people in West Lafayette, Montana was way more Western. And so I think I had to just suppress my Chinese side for a while. Um, but then after my son was born, it just sort of all came flooding back to me, my lineage and my heritage. And having a baby made me sort of think vertically. So I thought about what I wanted to pass on and who my parents were, who their parents were, and what that lineage is. And when when I saw, when I had Ty for the first time, the first thing I said to him is, "You look really Chinese. You're a little Chinese boy." And of course, my husband is Caucasian, but Ty looks more Chinese. My parents had come out for the birth, and I just developed a new appreciation for cultural heritage. What's on my mind comes into my work very directly, and having a baby and raising a child and figuring out how you want it to be a parent, that was like first and foremost. He's very, very connected with family. And I think that that's probably the biggest thing that I gave him. But he loves my mom, for instance. He's very, very warm and loving to her, and he loves it when we have these big Chinese gatherings. When he went to China, I will always remember when he landed, he said, "I feel strangely at home here." But he's pretty Americanized. He's another step more Americanized than me, and I think I'm pretty Americanized with an awareness of my culture. He's one step farther, more in the melting pot.
Your husband's family,
Has Chinese connection.
yeah.
Yeah. So David's mom, she was born in the Far East. They were Russian Jews. David's grandmother was escaping the pogroms in Russia, and then first they went to Harbin, and then they went to Shanghai. In 2013, we made a trip back, and this trip was dedicated to him, for him to find places where his mom had lived. And he's just recently finished a memoir about his mom's life in Shanghai and Japan. So I have another aunt who has this theory that Caucasians who have some Asian connection in their background are more likely to marry Chinese or Asian women. And it's weird because my sister's husband also has connections in Shanghai. He
Oh,
his his family was involved in shipping.
how do you feel when you go back to China?
Well, I mean, I can be a tourist, but I go and see my mom's family, most wonderful and warm people that I've ever met. So they just totally embrace us as family members and treat us like royalty. And the first time we went was when it was in 1995, and they really had very little. They were living in concrete block apartments with very poor lighting and crammed in, and they were all still wearing Mao jackets and stuff. And they really had very little. And we brought them lots and lots of presents, things as simple as ballpoint pens or magnets or toys and as well as jewelry and things like and perfumes and stuff like that. But they they were just so delighted with the smallest things. They had very little, but what they had, they gave us. So they gave us things like their Mao buttons, which is their only possessions. And we were so interested in the Mao culture.
Can I ask, like, what is the Mao culture? Like,
Well, Mao Zedong was a
mhm.
terrible and extremely powerful ruler of China for I can't remember how many years, but he's the person who's responsible for the communist China and the Cultural Revolution, Great Leap Forward, and the famine, and exterminating all the flies, and he just had extreme uh, power among um, charismatic power among the peasants and the workers, and he really garnered huge numbers of people to do outrageous things, including um, beating up their own parents if they were considered too intellectual. He started the program of sending intellectuals to the countryside to be sort of de-educated. And my parents even had some issues with, because her sisters and brothers had relatives in the West, so they had to suffer punishments.
Were the coats like something that was it like a fashion thing, or was
Oh,
it?
it was like almost demanded of you. You couldn't wear anything but these jackets that looked just like Chairman Mao wore. They were totally utilitarian. There's no, but no, you know, all really drab, like blue and gray and brown, black, um, and they, like my cousins when they got married, the only thing they could do for their ceremony is exchange their Mao buttons. That's no religion, no ceremony at all. For me, doing work about my own personal history and my own personal identity is very comfortable, and I feel like it's very much me. It's very honest. It's very true. I hope anyway that other people can pick up on it and see a larger story, that it has both social and political aspect. I mean, everybody has a mother and a father, and if you do have kids, thinking about what it means to bring somebody into the world in a in the larger context, I think that that has resonance with other people, and then um, issues about people who are marginalized or other than mainstream. I think that's really pertinent right now in this contemporary political climate. So I think that that's an important aspect of the work that I'm doing too, so that if you understand how culture creates a whole way of thinking, if you understand how different cultures have that larger worldview, I think it can be very helpful in creating peace and dialogue and coexistence. So I'm hoping that through extrapolation from one person's experience, that my work can speak to a larger audience.